Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. My name's Cindy Gross. For those who don't know me, my pronouns are she, her. I am a cisgender, straight, white woman, a sociable introvert, a trauma survivor. I'm over 50. I have both depression and anxiety. English is the only language I speak with any fluency whatsoever. I'm a breast cancer survivor. I'm a citizen of the Delaware Tribe of Indians and Cherokee Nation, as well as the United States. And I reside on the stolen lands of the Coast Salish and the Dormish. So I am a descendant of both colonizers and those they attempted to commit genocide against. My ancestors in the Lenape, which are now considered Delaware of various tribes, were removed 3 different times from the East Coast, where they greeted the original settlers or colonizers, and then moved to Pennsylvania, then Kansas, and then Oklahoma, where the splinter of the Lenape that I'm a part of, Delaware Tribe of Indians, currently has their headquarters, but no reservation land. I'm also a Cherokee citizen because the Cherokees were one of the few tribes that the US government in the 1920s considered civilized. And so they made accommodations with them to let them retain some amount of land ownership, not the land they had historically inhabited, but different land, mostly in what is now Oklahoma. And the Cherokee were kind enough to offer to adopt any Lenape or Delaware who wanted to join into their tribe. So due to that, I'm also a Cherokee citizen. And if anybody asks me my blood quantum, I'm going to say 100%, because Cherokee Nation has said I'm a Cherokee, and there you either are or you aren't. There is no blood quantum, there is no percentage. And the same with Delaware Tribe of Indians. So, and I do start my talks with land acknowledgement, because I think it's very important to reconnect with the land and to think about different ways that we steward the land, that we take care of the land, that we interact with the land. And one of the things that disrupts depression, anxiety, a lot of the societal ills that we have is getting back out in nature and thinking about how we're in nature and on the land differently. And there's a lot we can learn from the various Native nations that are still around, because there are Native people all around us. There are Native people who are living, laughing, and thriving, even as the systems continue to oppress us, them. And so I would encourage you to put something about the land you currently reside on in the chat. So native-land.ca is where you can go and look and see what land you currently reside on, or you can also look at places you've vacationed, places you've lived, where you were born. So I'd encourage you to put that in the chat, and then also look into doing land acknowledgements in any meetings, chats, talks that you're attending or giving in the future.
What was that again? The native?
It's native-land.ca.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could put that in the chat, or in the in the chat window, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm doing it now.
Okay, excellent. And if you go on my website and search on land acknowledgement, befriendingdragons.com, I have that link, as well as a sample land acknowledgement I've given a couple times at the CEO annual announcement of new ventures that they're funding. So there are some tips on how to do a meaningful land acknowledgement that's not just performative and goes a little bit deeper. And one of those is focusing on the present and the future, and not just the past. And when we talk about the past, don't be afraid to say the really negative things like genocide and slaughter and stolen, because that is what happened to, the 99% of Native Americans who did not survive the colonization of the Americas. So thank you for that heavy start to things. I think it is relevant to my journey, where I experienced harassment, which is a very specific type of bullying, and that brought back out and made much worse depression, anxiety, and then as I was healing from that, I've also entered perimenopause, so I'm starting to have all of the physical symptoms that go with both getting older and with having my hormones disrupted on a regular basis, and the patterns that I'm used to no longer applying. And so returning to my roots and learning more about my own lineage, my own history, my own culture, and reconnecting with how Cherokee and Delaware nations do things has been part of my own personal healing process. So reconnecting with our ancestors, reconnecting with any community out there is very important. And one thing I do want to point out is if you are doing a land acknowledgement for a specific nation or tribe, a nation being a recognized legal entity with sovereignty. Many tribes are also nations, but not all tribes have managed to get federal recognition for their sovereignty. And various treaties have been renegotiated at various times to take away some of that sovereignty. Make sure you visit that tribe's site and find out how they prefer land acknowledgements be done. A lot of them, not all of them, have guidance on that. So many of you know, I left tech. I left tech and tech lost me because they put up white male bars all over the place. And basically what happens is there are all these false proxies or gatekeeping methods that are built into something that is generally expressed as some variation of we're not going to lower the bar. You know, I went into a meeting, again, being the only woman in the room was so common. And I said, hey, manager and team, I've got 2 women candidates for our open position. And my manager, without skipping a beat, said, but we're not going to lower the bar. And that, I think, is so indicative of what we face on a daily basis. And his boss was in the room and said, no, it's not about lowering the bar. Like, he was being an ally, he stepped in, but the damage was done. Like, I heard I wasn't good enough. They had lowered the bar to let me in. And then on that same team, once I was harassed in a way that was bad enough, I felt like I needed to report it. I then turned around and saw much more harassment that I had not seen before. I was gaslighting myself out of seeing it. And so in the process of beginning to see all the harassment, to see all the bullying that was happening, all the bias, that just kept making my depression worse. And so I was seeing a therapist. I went up to 3 times a week. I was seeing my therapist at that point. And I eventually went on leave, originally for just a few weeks. It extended to 6 months, and Microsoft said, you've reached our limit. And at that point I left. So I was paid for a tiny portion of that time on short-term disability, but I was able to drive, I was able to get in the shower. So insurance did not consider me disabled. And so they wouldn't pay out the long-term disability. So that's a systemic problem. I was not able to function. I was not able to make decisions. Microsoft did not want me. If they knew the extent of my impairment, they would not have wanted me to come to work, but I didn't have a good path forward. I didn't have a good way to make a living and take the time to heal. So I ended up quitting, and I'm living off my savings. So that is a large part of my journey, and that is what has led me to my current role as a workplace thrival coach, and I'm also a race and gender equity adaptive leader. And when I coach, I do very much incorporate the race and gender equity perspectives, because so many people don't see how how gender harassment, sexual harassment, and racial harassment are endemic in our society, and that the ways that it shows up in tech are very specific. There are ways that it shows up in terms of, you know, that we won't lower the bar. Passion and confidence are things that are usually measured with the way white men exhibit, or we expect white men to exhibit passion. And staying after hours. A lot of women, and especially Black women, don't have the ability to stay after hours, working on weekends, being really flexible with time. These are things that men, and especially white men, are more likely to be able to do, and those are viewed as passion. And confidence is something that is measured by a certain amount of arrogance. And arrogance is valued a lot of times in men, and it is not valued in women or people that get, especially really far from white men, darker skinned people, or people with accents, people who don't fit this stereotype, this white male bar. So out of that, I started framing things in terms of befriending dragons. And basically a dragon is an obstacle, a roadblock. It's something that has a fixed or limited perspective. There's something called perspecticide, where you start losing the ability to see perspectives beyond the one put in front of you. And abusers, manipulators, coercive controllers will do it on purpose, but a lot of systems do it as a side effect, where you're told these other options aren't available to you. And so this perspecticide means your perspective gets limited. And there are also very physical things that happen in our brain when trauma is triggered, when we experience depression or anxiety, when something is bringing up past harms to us, our options narrow. It's physically happening in our brains. And so we need to be able to step back, and a lot of times breathing, meditation, yoga, counting to 10, those are all things that literally open back up our brain and let us see more perspectives. And coaching is one way that when I was having people coach me, they were helping me see that I would say, well, my only way forward is this, or I only have these two choices. And they'd say, is that really true? And I go, well, of course it is. Well, no, I guess I could do this third thing, or I could do this fourth thing, or I could do that fifth thing, because the act of considering the question is one of those things that opens back up the possibilities. So these dragons can be inside ourselves, they can be external, they can be about individual interactions, or they can be systemic. So individual actions are micro. That's where the term microaggressions come from. It's the way we enforce the macro or systemic problems in our society: bullying, racism, sexism, ableism. All of those things are microaggressions that enforce on a daily basis the macro aggressions or macro systems that oppress us. And then the befriending part is about leadership of self. So it's about, how do I want to show up at any given moment in any situation? And it's a never-ending process. It's a journey through life where we create new perspectives, and we're able to see and make new choices because we're getting rid of that perspecticide. We're opening up perspectives and choices. So befriending dragons is leading yourself to new perspectives, harmonies, and choices. So that's me talking a lot. I'd like to see in the chat the answer to the question of, what is something that is healing or restorative for you? And you can put one thing, you can put 10 things, you can answer once, you can answer multiple times, whatever you want. But what is something that is healing or restorative for you? And take a couple minutes, and while you're thinking about that and typing something that's healing or restorative, I do want to say that I actually was mentioned in Business Insider yesterday, where they talked about a little bit about my story. And I have tried long and hard to get the press to listen. And it is one of the harms of being harassed and bullied that everybody says, well, did you contact a lawyer? And I'm like, well, I did, but I really didn't want to have to. Like, contacting lawyers was in many ways as harmful as being harassed and being bullied and facing pay inequities. And so I did join in the attempt to do a class action lawsuit against Microsoft, which failed to become a class action. Some people still got individual payouts. I turned down the payout offer I got because I would have had to sign an NDA and a no rehire clause. And the harm from that is that I wouldn't have been able to tell my story. Now, I've told my story to so many reporters, I couldn't even tell you how many. And this is one of the few times it's actually been published. So Business Insider yesterday, there was a story about 3 women who left tech. I have blogs on white male bars, Reclaiming My Voice, The Land Acknowledgement. So I encourage you to look at those for my history. I don't want to spend the whole hour on that. So going back and looking at what you're putting here, healing and restorative things are hobbies: gardening, sewing, meditation, exercise, reading, walking outside alone, walking in a forest, reading again, calm and quiet, walking outside with a friend, biking, hiking, walking, climbing, running, reading, feeding, watching the birds, or nature, animals, dancing, being with friends, being outside, reading, walking, yoga, mind body podcast, meditation, taking pictures, affirmation. So thank you for taking the time to do that, and for being willing to speak up, and continue throughout the hour putting things in there as they occur to you, because it is useful to other people. And I'm going to cover some of these in a little bit. So what I just did was ask what's called a gracious space opening question. There's this whole concept around gracious space that invites people to interact differently, to build relationships as the foundation of every effort that we do. And it's part of an adaptive leadership methodology. So gracious space is where you invite difference and learn in public. And you're creating a setting, an environment throughout your entire interaction that is opening and welcome and brings people in. And the people you're bringing in are those most affected by whatever it is you're working on. So quite often in tech, there's a bunch of people that are, regardless of our original origins, at that point, once we're in tech, we're middle class, we have a certain amount of income, we have certain perspectives on life, and we tend to make and sell products that maybe aren't affordable to people who haven't been lucky enough to get into tech. We tend to create things with barriers that are unnecessary. Just we don't think about the barriers they create for somebody who maybe has a hearing impairment or is completely deaf. That might be difficult for somebody that only has one arm, or something like that. And so when you think about the gracious space concept, and there's a book, there's TED Talk, there's all sorts of training online for this. It's Pat Hughes and Bill Grace that created this concept about 20 years ago. If you start implementing gracious space, you can create empathy in your workplace. If you start out every meeting just doing the opening question, and the question should be something that's relevant to the topic of the day and is very open-ended. So you don't try to put a judgment on it. You don't try to push people down a path. And the best gracious space opening questions are ones where people give unexpected answers, something that the rest of the room didn't expect to hear. So that is a great way to build empathy within your team at work, and to get people to think of everybody else as people. Like people with full lives, people who talk about something other than deadlines and all of these important impending things that are coming up at work. And I do ask you to also go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Most of them we'll probably get to at the end. But if there's something that you think has to be asked right in that moment, put a comment in there that you want it answered now. And the moderators will take a look at that for us. But I will definitely leave room for questions at the end. So first of all, I don't have a really strict script on this. So if somebody asks something or wants me to go a different direction, I'm open to that. My plan is to start with the problem and then go into some of the solutions. And I do see a comment here about gracious space, so I will take this one right now, because I think gracious space is so important. So gracious space is this concept of a spirit in a setting where you invite the stranger and learn in public. And when you think about how you set up a room, like, is it a bunch of rows of chairs without tables? Is it chairs with tables? Is it chairs in groups of 4? Is it chairs in groups of 8? Like, that's all part of the setting. When you do it with the intent to invite difference and learn in public, you're probably going to choose a different physical setup. And so this opening question and reflections throughout the day, and reflections at the end, bring in more elements that enable people to think about relationships, think about people, and continuously think about inviting difference and learning together in public. In other words, making mistakes, failing, and being gracious when people fail, being gracious when things don't go as expected or the way somebody doesn't like. The equity perspective would be prioritize the feelings, comfort, safety, and needs of the people most marginalized. So as a white woman, if I'm inconvenienced, made uncomfortable, even made to feel unsafe in a room full of people who aren't white, then I need to control my own feelings. I need to lead myself through that and not expect the people who aren't white to lead me as a white person through their response to white supremacy. Like, that is my job, not theirs. So add that in, but basically you want to invite these differences. So when you do this opening question, like I asked about healing and restoration, because that's what the talk is about today. It's what the day is about. If you hear somebody that says, what's your superpower? Fine. It's not the best gracious space opening question in the world. It's a check-in question. It's not necessarily leading to gracious space, but it is an example of something. So the more specific you can get for the topic of the day, the more useful the opening question is. So if you're there to get people to really focus in on a deliverable for the day, your gracious space question should probably be focused on that deliverable. If you're there for the day to explore and open things up, your gracious space question should probably really be open and talk about when's the time you found something completely unexpected that changed the course of your entire project. That would be a question for a meeting or an event where you really want to explore. If you want to focus on something, your question might be along the lines of when's the time you came together and really focused on a project and it was enabled you to accomplish great things. You know, that would be a different goal for the day. All right, so let's move on and we can talk more about gracious space at the end. I am a certified trainer in gracious space. I don't want to oversell it just because I happen to be affiliated with it, but the reason I'm a certified trainer is because I truly believe in the power of gracious space. So my personal problem is bullies. And a lot of times we think of bullies as something that happens in our childhood and not necessarily as adults. Well, if we think about it, we're getting bullied a lot of the time. So if we're asked to expend energy on fixing ourselves, changing ourselves, being inauthentic, we're being bullied. Now, are we being pushed into something that is useful or good for the business or useful to other people on the team? Maybe, but we're still being bullied, because from my perspective, the impact is I don't get to spend my time and energy on something I want to do in a way that feels good to me. I'm being asked to change. And so when we think about bullies, many systems are set up to enable and encourage bullies, and certainly to allow them to get away with things. It can go completely unchecked, or it can even be subtly or maybe even very directly encouraged. Bullies might be rewarded, they might just be ignored, and a lot of times they will steal our energy, ideas, and work. And again, the perspecticide concept, where they start saying, well, the only way to do things. The person that I ended up reporting for harassment for a very specific incident that was very derogatory, sexual comment type of thing, he would regularly send out emails to the team that said things like, well, I know some of you go and read up on these new features. You go and try to find the specs on these features you're trying to learn, because we were usually among the first people to use new features that were coming out long before they were in alpha, let alone beta products. And he would just yell at us, usually over email, but sometimes in person. You guys don't know what you're doing. You're not technical enough. You're not good enough at this because you read about it first instead of just diving in and learning from all the mistakes you're going to make. And sure, that worked for him. It was definitely not my style. I wanted to read what was already there, get my thoughts in order, and then move forward methodically, not just randomly. So that would be a form of perspecticide, of him just telling us very forcefully with the weight of management behind him that his way was the only way it could be done. That would be a type of bullying. There's a whole concept called coercive control that I'm not going to go into here. It's usually thought of in terms of domestic violence and cults, but there are so many things about it that I've learned that apply to this as well. So if you're interested, go look up what coercive control is and take a look at how that might apply. And you've heard terms like gaslighting, and that's a form of coercive control. And we often gaslight ourselves so that we can stay in an environment. I need this money. I need this health insurance. I need the prestige, the credibility. I'm healing a wound by trying to prove that I am good enough to be here because they keep telling me I'm not. And quite often it's not that I'm not good enough. It's that I'm not doing things exactly the way they do it, because what they do isn't authentic to me. And tech in particular doesn't want us to express emotions. It wants us to be 100% confident in a way that can only be expressed in a very narrow set of ways. And if we do express an emotion, it either needs to be anger, or it needs to be a very positive type of passion that, again, is only showing up in certain ways. So I can be passionate about back-end engineering when I was on the Windows team. I could have been very passionate about kernel debugging. My manager encouraged me in 100 different ways to get passionate about kernel debugging. I hated kernel debugging. And there was no reason I needed to do more than the minimal amount that I did when certain things happen. Like, I did enough kernel debugging to do my job, but I hated it and I wasn't very good at it, and I didn't need to be. But the fact that I didn't want to learn it, in his mind and a lot of other people on the team, meant that I wasn't passionate enough about my job, because I wasn't willing to learn in the way they wanted to learn and troubleshoot problems the way they needed them to be done, even though there were other people on the team who loved doing it. And on those cases where it needed to be used, they could do it. Like, if we work together as a team, we don't all have to do the same thing. So they were bullying me in the nicest possible way. Everybody on that team was an incredibly nice person, but they were in their own way bullying me to follow the rules that they followed. And so this is one of those things that brought out, again, the depression, anxiety. And because I had a lot of trauma in my childhood that I had never named as trauma, like, until I started going to therapy 3 times a week, I had never thought of some of my childhood experiences as abusive or traumatic. And now I look back and I go, oh my God, my ACE score is a 5 out of 10. And adverse childhood experiences are ACE scores. If you have higher than a 3, your risk of cancer goes way up. And I have had breast cancer. Your chance of a heart attack goes way up. And so to have an ACE score of 5 is significant. And I would have sworn up and down I wasn't abused as a child, because set of things didn't happen. I wasn't enough of a victim of things. Therefore, my experiences weren't valid enough. So, and I just want to bring one other thing in as a problem, is this whole concept of lazy. So in the few years since I've left Microsoft, one of the things I have enjoyed the most is that I no longer ever think of myself as lazy. If I decide to put off something like filing my taxes, for example, I have absolutely no excuses going to do it last Saturday. I don't feel like it. Yeah, there's an amount of procrastination and avoidance going on, but you know what? I just enjoyed myself last weekend, and I didn't feel lazy about it. I didn't put any emotions on it. I thought about it and I went, can I do it this next weekend? Yes. I don't have anything on my calendar. I can do it. I'm going to go do the things that are healthy for me. And regardless of whether it's a good decision, a bad decision, I am not going to put the word lazy on it. I'm not going to feel like I have to be busy all the time. If all I do is sit on the patio and talk to my cats, that's good enough. I'm not being lazy. I'm taking care of myself. I'm recognizing my needs. I'm paying attention to my instincts. And I think the corporate world does not want us to do that. It doesn't want us to take time. It doesn't want us to take a breath. It doesn't want us to step away from anything. So, It's a whole lot of things in the problem scope. I'm going to go through some solutions. And I have not really been watching the chat here. So anything I need to address?
No, I think you're good. Just some comments that you know we could look at later, but there's no questions for you, so that's good.
Okay, great. Thank you. So there's a bunch of stuff. I caught the end of Gilda's talk. I wasn't able to make it earlier because I had a client this morning, but I think she covered some of the other things that I want to go through, and I will go through them, but I want to focus first on question the narrative. So this is something that I developed for the anti-racism group coaching that I do, where everything we hear, if we ask 4 questions, we can completely change the way we look at it. And I think it applies to bullying of all sorts, not just racial bullying. So the first question is, who is centered? And it's really about thinking about anytime we hear something, even something as simple as bullying happened to me. You know, this thing happened to me and I was bullied. Well, who's centered in that story? I am. Like, it's saying that I am responsible for everything that happened, and it's a passive voice. So the centering is on only me. On the other hand, if I say he bullied me, I'm saying he is centered as the perpetrator, and I am centered as a victim, survivor, or survivor of something that happened in the past and still has impacts today. So that's an example of questioning on who is centered. And there's, I put the link in there to the doc I use. So whose viewpoints do we hear? Who is seen as a multidimensional person? Who has agency and gets to make the decisions? And who decides what lessons were learned from the interaction?
So, hey, Cindy, one sec. I think everyone might not see it because you sent a host and panelist. So I'm just going to send it to everybody now for you. Okay. Just
okay.
so in case you see it in there twice. That's why.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So I think if you're experiencing something and you're like, did I experience sexism? Did I experience bullying? Did I experience racism? Did I experience a combination of those things? Because quite often we forget the intersection. Black women, for example, experience things that neither Black men or white women experience all the time. So they experience all the bad things that happen to women in general, all the things that happen to Black people in general, and then there are things that only happen to Black women. So that's an example of intersectionality, and literally the example that led to the term intersectionality being created by Kimberly Crenshaw as one of the foundations of critical race theory. So when we look at how these different oppressions or discrimination or bias compound and build on top of each other, we're looking at intersectionality, and we're looking at different critical theories of looking at the systems around us and ways that we can disrupt the systems by first paying attention to them and seeing the impact and not just the intent as it shows up in the words. The intent of why the words were created that way may be very different than the way it shows up in the words. So the next thing in the question, the narrative, is power dynamics. Who actually has power in this situation? So when I was bullied, and I was bullied from the day I stepped on the team, you know, I was introduced to him as, oh, he's the walking HR violation. Don't worry, he treats everybody badly. Ha ha, isn't that funny? Like literally on my first day on that team. And I'd been at Microsoft for a long time. I'd wanted to be on the SQL Cat team for a really long time. Finally get on the team. I was still remote. I was living in Idaho at the time. I flew into the office for the first time that I was on that team. He's walking down the hall, and I was introduced as he's the walking HR violation. And later when I said, who on the team should I have as a mentor to help me really understand how the team operates? His name was at the top of the list. You really need to be on his good side. You really need him on your side, helping you out with things. And he can tell you the best way to operate on this team. And instead of seeing that as a red flag and running the other direction, I said, no, I wanted to be on CAT forever. So therefore, I'm going to stick it out, and I'm not going to have him as a mentor, but I'm going to try to ignore all the harm that I could see he was doing on a regular basis, long before he said the completely vile things that he said to me that were bad enough for Microsoft to say, yeah, he violated Microsoft's anti-harassment policy. But then he did not face any real consequences. Rumor has it that he was being considered for promotion that year and that he was no longer being considered. Don't know if that's true. Even if he was put up for promotion at the level he was at, not very many people who were put up for promotion actually made it through the promotion phase. So was that a punishment or not? I don't know. So he had the power in that situation. He had the backing of management on the team, even though he also harassed quite a few of the managers on the team. So when we tell the story of bullies, we need to really think about, beyond the bully, who has power. My manager could have stepped in. His manager could have stepped in. Like, there are all sorts of people who could have told the bully his behavior wasn't acceptable, but nobody did. And after I reported harassment to my manager, it was another year before I reported to HR, but after I reported to my manager, he basically talked me out of reporting to HR, but he told all the other managers what had happened. He told the GM what had happened, and everything changed. I no longer had any power. I no longer had my manager or anyone else spending social capital on me, and I blamed myself. I twisted myself into a pretzel, trying to be good enough and to get back on track. And it was just never going to happen because I didn't recognize the power dynamics at play. I didn't recognize what was going on at a bigger level than me. The next question is, what other truths exist in the story? So quite often it'll be like, well, that couldn't have been discrimination based on their gender or race because this other person we promoted had, one more year of experience. Okay, well, it's not an either or, it's what additional truths exist. Yeah, that person had one more year of experience, and the person that was passed over for promotion or not assigned to the project was actually a better fit for these 10 different reasons. You can't say because this one thing is true that you get to ignore all the other truths. So asking what are the additional truths is a very powerful thing. And then the last thing to do is tell a different version of the story. Tell it to yourself, tell it to other people. Reframe, I didn't leave tech, to tech lost me, for example. So that's an example of me moving into a framework where I've done all of these things. I've changed who's centered, I've changed the power dynamics, I've added additional truths into the situation, and I told an anti-bullying version of the story. Every time I say tech lost me, tech lost that on average $140,000 it costs to replace a tech worker in the United States. Tech lost all of the value that I could have brought to the team. I was harmed in the process, and tech was harmed in the process. Microsoft was harmed in the process, and they continue to do it. So I'm just going to run through real quick, try to spend like 5 minutes on this, and then get to questions. So connect with people, communities, land, nature, sun, connect with our history, connect with our future. Take care of your body, especially if you're depressed, if you're experiencing anxiety. And if you have issues with people touching your body, those of us that are sexual assault survivors, sometimes it can be uncomfortable having somebody do a massage. Ask the questions. Let the massage therapist know. Let the manager of the place know. You might have some issues. You might need to keep all your clothes on the first couple times or forever. You might need them to not touch certain parts of your body, and do what you can to get things like a massage. And, good chance your insurance actually does cover it, just has to be prescribed in a certain way. And it's so helpful, especially during the pandemic, to have somebody taking care of you, touching you in ways that are healing and literally relaxing your body. And then find other ways to get in your body and being comfortable getting in your body. As if you've been harassed, you're a trauma survivor. Trauma can make it really hard to want to be in your body. So when people say, do breathing, do yoga, move mindfully because it will get you in your body. Yes, that's true. And you have to work with a therapist or a friend or whoever to get comfortable with the idea of being in your body. It is okay to be in your body. And it's okay to say, that's enough. I had my 30 seconds of being in my body and that's all I can handle. That's fine. Step out and try to increase your tolerance for being in your body, because that is part of the healing process. And part of that is body positivity or body neutrality. They're related, but slightly different. Just really think about your body is your body. It is getting you through life. You don't have to meet somebody else's standard of attractiveness. You don't have to be skinny or look a certain way in order to be loved. You deserve love, and platonic love from your friends, romantic love, whatever you're looking for, you deserve it and you can get it. Society might make it more or less difficult depending on how you look, but you don't have to add to that by assuming or blaming yourself. So really lean into, healthy at every size, things like that. Increasing number of doctors won't weigh you when you come into the office, especially if you tell them not to, because mountains of evidence that your weight has very little to do with your health in almost every way. And that diets are the problem and not the increased weight. So every time we go on a diet, 99% of us put back on as much weight or more than we have before. And they're looking at the idea that it's that cycle of gaining and losing weight that are causing the health problems that we currently incorrectly associate with a lot of health problems. So really think about how you're judging yourself and your body. And just one practical tip, you can get skimmies. If any of you are familiar with that. So if you want to wear a dress in the summer, and like me, I'm big enough now that my thighs rub together. Well, if you get skimmies, they go further down your leg, and you can get really pretty decorative ones. You can get ones with lace on the end. You can get ones that are really soft, and some of them have pockets. And I love the skimmies with pockets because I don't have to limit myself to dresses that have pockets, as long as I'm okay with the fact that I have my skimmies on. And if I need to get my phone out of my pocket, I'm just hiking my dress up to my waist and reaching in my pocket. And you're like, I don't care. I don't care if everybody sees my huge tummy. I don't care if people feel like I'm being inappropriate. I need to have pockets in my clothes. Not all the dresses I really love come with it. And I don't care if people think that I don't need to wear a dress because I'm too fat or whatever. I don't care. I'm going to wear it anyway. And then in the workplace, have empathy, develop empathy. So developing empathy in the workplace, I strongly encourage gracious space. Pat Hughes offers training. I can do training. Just learn about it from reading the book. The book's, I don't know, less than $20. I think maybe like $15. You can do equity fishbowls. It requires that you've already built a strong relationship among the team, probably with some gracious space or other similar methodology. And then you have people, facilitators sit and have a discussion while everybody else watches the fishbowl of them in the middle. It needs to be very well moderated, and it can bring up a lot of heavy emotions, and it needs to be well managed so the people who are marginalized are not harmed. And also bring in fiction. One way to create empathy is fiction. Talk about fictional books, talk about stories. If you have a team morale event and you go to see the latest superhero movie, come back and talk about who you had empathy for, who you were able to identify with, who you might try to identify with if you go home and watch it a second time. Those are all ways you can bring empathy into the workplace. Prioritize yourself. Be very clear on your own values, boundaries, and needs. And always think about my boundaries. I can't set a boundary that says you can't do that. I can set a boundary that says, when people do that, I'm going to react this way. If somebody does something that feels like bullying to me, I am going to get myself to a safe space, mentally and physically. I'm going to say something to, you can decide, the manager, the person, my best friend, my therapist, whatever. You get to choose. You set your boundaries, but you can only set your boundaries for yourself. You can't set them for other people. And keep in mind, how will we work together differently? Whenever you're looking at a situation, don't just focus on this hurt, that was bad, this other thing happened. Think about, I want to work together differently in this way, because you're focused on the relationship and you're focused on how you want things to be. And really think about how you want to show up in each of those moments. Give yourself grace when you're not able to show up that way. Keep practicing and keep in mind that you're allowed to show up how you want to show up. So that's all I had prepared. So what questions do people have?
I think it's more like comments, really. There's a lot of comments, including I've had mentioned some comments. So it's kind of along the lines of just what you've been talking to, right? So about, and going back, way back, Gal mentioned everyone has a different learning style. And Mala mentioned that you had SQL MCM.
Yeah, I was in one of the early groups of people who got the SQL Master certification. I don't even remember what the new name is after they renamed it and then disbanded it, but it was at the time a very intense thing. So very few people even got accepted into the MCM program. About half the people who got it ended up being Microsoft employees for a very good reason. But at the time, you had to go through 3 weeks of training. Prior to that, it had been 5 weeks. And so we went to training. It was a very selective group of people who got to go. And then 3 weeks of training, that was 8 hours a day. And we broke up into study groups and often studied until midnight or 1 a.m. and then got up the next morning and went back to class. And then we had to take a written test at the end of each week and a practical test that was 6 hours. We had to implement a whole bunch of things within a time limit to very specific specifications across the entire SQL Server product. And of the very selective group of people who got in, only about half actually passed and got the certification. And you would think that that would have been valued by people at least within Microsoft or people in the larger SQL Server community. And quite often it was just like, that's another certification. Anybody can pass the certification if you study enough. It's like,
yeah, that's different. Yeah, that's not the same. It's not like, oh, you can just go buy the answers on Test King either or something. It's not like, yeah, whatever. Right. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's a big deal. When I saw that, I was like, ooh, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
For sure. And so Gail sent a link to a Gracious Space overview PDF from Eastside Pathways. It's in there. So that's in the chat.
Yeah, and so Eastside Pathways is a partner organization to I volunteer with Leadership Eastside. Leadership Eastside has a 2-year program that teaches adaptive leadership with good doses of gracious space. It's one of the main tenets, one of the main things you learn and practice. So both Eastside Pathways and Leadership Eastside offer opportunities to lean into it and actually do it, experience gracious space. And then Pat Hughes through Trillium Consulting has here's a training, either here's a 1-hour training, she has half-day trainings, or she has custom trainings. So there's lots of ways you can learn more about gracious space. And she has the book and the TED Talk.
Okay. Oh, nice. Okay. All different ways that you can learn
Yes.
that. Yeah, that's nice. Do people learn different ways? Like, so that's the point. So Gina mentioned that she was really glad you were touching on power dynamics, because we have to be aware of the power we have and the blindness of others to their own power until it's challenged.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and quite often we blame somebody who faces a problem or who experiences the problem because, again, they're centered in the wrong way. And so when we only talk about the person who experienced the problem, we're forgetting or ignoring or choosing not to pay attention to the power of the people who caused the problem, allowed the problem, benefit from the system as it exists, and the system is encouraging this uneven power dynamic.
Yeah, that's very true. I was just thinking, last year, I think it was, I saw, now her name is escaping me, Monica Lewinsky. So many years later, right? and just what she went through and that, oh my God. I mean, it's clearly not her fault. I mean, it's like people blame her and you're like, well, wait a second, like how is it her fault?
Right.
Oh, because she tempted him. You know, the whole thing, it just makes me think of a thing like, I'm not sure everybody thinks this way, but it feels like a societal thing. Like if a woman cheats on her husband, well, it's clearly the woman's fault. If a man cheats on his wife, well, the woman's either not giving him what he needed or the mistress is a temptress. You know, it's that idea that there's this disconnect with, because Gail is saying, the arrogant, misogynistic males, in tech or anywhere. I mean, not even in tech, but I agree with Gail, yeah, in tech too, that they're allowed to be incredibly obnoxious.
Right.
So, and then Kellen mentioned many times bullies will inoculate themselves by trying to mentor those they would likely be bullied by, and then try to appear innocent when they fear being caught for previous behavior. Yeah. So yeah. You know what really resonated for me? There are more comments, but before I forget, is the gaslighting yourself. Because for years I said to everybody, no, I never had sexual harassment or this, this discrimination. And I've had managers say things to me, white men say to me too, and they were also, most of my managers have been white men, say to me things like, I think you shouldn't take that advanced class, because they stop and they explain something and then they say, but it's not because you're a woman. And I was like, well, I wasn't really thinking that, was I, until you said it. Oh, look at your cat. It reminds me of my mango is a little orange tabby. Oh, so cute.
Yeah,
so
Goose says hi.
What's your cat's name?
Goose the Flurkin. If any of you have seen Captain Marvel, this is Goose. He may open his mouth at any point and swallow the entire room and everyone in it. That's truly a Flurkin. But yeah, what you just said about, like there's so much going on in the room and there's so many other ways we can look at the situation, and we try to talk ourselves out of it because it's protective. It feels like we want to be back in that safe space of not knowing what's going on. And so gaslighting can be a safety mechanism, and that's something you can work through with a therapist.
It's interesting. Yeah. The whole thing, and you mentioned about trauma and in your childhood, and you don't realize how that impacts you. So I have migraines, and Kellen mentioned that as well. She had migraines in the chat here. She stopped using medication because she was doing massage for that. Personally, massage made me have I have a massage and I get a migraine, but now so I was reading this stuff. I put this in the chat too. Alan Gordon has this really good podcast called, let me look at that, I always forget the name, Tell Me About Your Pain. And he has a book called The Way Out. I'm not affiliated with him at all. I just happened upon it. And it's so good because it tells you, like, I realized maybe I was just being triggered in the massage, right? So that it's not, the massage is not causing a migraine. It's just my system is so amped up from the trauma, from gaslighting myself all these years, and it just all sort of coming together. It's so interesting and powerful what you're saying.
So I haven't had a chance to, I still haven't read through all the comments. I'm trying to focus on this. Is there a specific question? We've got about 5 minutes.
I don't think a lot of people are saying they agree with you, and all of this. Yeah, it's pretty much like comments around agreeing. Let me see some more. Oh, Gina, yeah, the Monica story. It's just terrible how we treat it. Yeah, I agree. It was terrible.
Yeah. And I saw somebody put Your Body Speaks Your Mind, and I haven't read that one, but Your Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menachem is very good. And Resma does somatic healing. And it's something that when I was in tech, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so woo-woo, all of these Reiki, and like, that can't possibly be useful. And now I'm a firm believer. Go to anything that is movement and focused on healing, and there's a growing body of evidence of why it works, how it actually literally opens up pathways in our brain or changes the way that chemicals flow through our brain, hormones and other things. So I strongly recommend some sort of somatic thing. So yoga is somatic. It is body focused, but it's rarely paired with therapy or words. So Bernadette Pleasant occasionally does these dance sessions. And I really enjoyed just going. It was a couple of hours long, and she said, dance green. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but everybody just starts dancing green. And she's like, dance the color blue. Yeah. Okay, now dance something that feels good. Now dance something that feels bad. So like she led you into it, but it really helped you get in touch with things that you weren't necessarily willing to get in touch with. Because, you know, she didn't put the dance out something that feels bad and the first thing. She led into it with some other steps first.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like it's so interconnected. I don't think there's any questions. There's more comments that really, you know, agreeing with, yeah, we need a like button. Yeah, we need a like button for the chat. I agree. Otherwise, yeah, you know, yeah. So yeah, it's really good. I thought it was really, you brought up a lot of good points.
And I do have, I put the befriendingdragons.com link in here. So there's a resources page that has a handful of things. Honestly, it hasn't been updated in a couple of years, but a handful of things that can help mostly with racial equity, but a lot of those apply to gender equity as well. Oh, another kitty.
He came and meowed, and so he's like, no.
Yes, the cats insert themselves when they want to be inserted. And then on my website, there's also a schedule page, and the schedule is a list of events like this one. So a lot of them are recordings. If any of you have experienced in harassment and you're considering going to a lawyer, first of all, great. I encourage you to talk to a lawyer. There's a podcast listed on that page, Money and Untabooed with Jen Sapel. And she interviewed me about the harm of NDAs. And if you're considering signing any sort of settlement agreement that involves a non-disclosure agreement, which in most states is still required, or it's allowed that the companies require an NDA to give you even $1, really think through, because I've talked to a lot of women when I started talking about being harassed. I talked to a lot of women who said, I went through something like that and I took a settlement, and I'll go, I heard from the lawyers settlements average 1 to 2 months. And they go, I can't say anything because I signed an NDA. And then they'll go, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with the average is 1 to 2 months. And when you think about it, you experience something followed with
so
a lot.
Is it 1 to 2 months pay, Cindy? That's all it is?
That is what I was told by a couple of different lawyers was the average. Now I've never gone to find data.
That's certainly not worth it. That's certainly not. I thought it would be like much higher.
No, so the attempted class action lawsuit that I attempted to join with the pay equity group, or I joined, but the courts decided it wasn't a class action. They took a bunch of the data down, but there was data up when it was still in court. And you can look at some of the things that happened to the women that joined the class action. And the settlement I was offered as part of that was a little bit more than 1 to 2 months. Iffy whether I can say exactly how much. It was not much more. And this was with the full force of a big name law firm and dozens of other women involved. And they were still considering both the pay equity issue, which was hundreds of thousands of dollars less than a coworker, a white male coworker, who was brave enough to tell me his salary for the years that the lawsuit was potentially going to cover. I made hundreds of thousands of dollars less than him. And the amount that they were willing to pay me, even under the threat of that lawsuit, was not much more than a couple months. So that's all in that podcast. So really think about it if you're going to sign. I would not be able to have this conversation if I had signed an NDA. I would not be able to accept a consulting agreement with Microsoft. I would not be able to, the 133 subsidiaries of Microsoft at the time they offered me the NDA, I would not have been able to take a contracting job, a consulting job. If I found somebody I was going to coach and I wanted Microsoft, or they wanted Microsoft to cover the cost of coaching, which is a pretty common thing, wouldn't have been able to happen under the no rehire clause. And the NDA, the standard in the industry or corporate America, not just tech, is that the only people you can talk to are a spiritual advisor under a strict confidentiality, so like in confession type statements, a lawyer working on that particular case, a healthcare provider giving very specific things, guidance, advice, treatment around the harassment only, and a spouse, not a domestic partner, not somebody you live with but never married. That's it. I could never go into an interview if I went back into tech, if I had signed the NDA, and say why I truly left Microsoft. I couldn't mention it if I had signed the NDA. I'd have to lie in my interview at the next job if I had signed that NDA. And that's just normal practice. So think long and hard before you sign an NDA, and make sure you get more than a couple of months of salary if they're willing to bump it up. So,
Well, that was all really like
Some
a
more,
lot of
now we're all
information.
thinking, I guess we're all thinking, we're doing a lot of thinking. You've made me think a lot. I'm like remembering all the times, like when the CEO grabbed my ankle and rubbed his hand on the bottom of my shoe, or the time my coworker was rubbing my shoulders, and I was like, don't do that. My male coworker, male CEO, all men, yeah, so yeah.
so I will tell you that the anti-harassment policies of most companies are extremely broad. Like, once I actually reported to HR and started talking to them, they told me that basically anything that you can make a reasonable argument for that happened to you because of your gender is considered sexual harassment. So the terminology, even sexual harassment, makes it sound like it has to be about somebody pressuring you into sex or dating retaliation or something like that. That is a tiny fraction of harassment. So if your boss rub your feet but not rub the feet of any men on the team, that is 100% sexual harassment under most companies' harassment policies, which may be different than the state policies, and all of which is a civil issue, not a criminal issue, which is a whole problem. Like, why do I have to prosecute harassment? Whereas if I had done something to the company, if I had stolen from the company, the government bears all the cost and time of prosecuting. But if the company harms me, I bear the cost of trying to get them to pay for it.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
And so don't try, like, you can try to prove that harassment under a policy or under law happened. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I spent a lot of time on that. What I learned along the way is whether it meets the company's requirement or not is not an example of whether it happened. It's an example of whether it fits their narrow definition. So there are many times I was harassed, as I can now experience it or now talk about it, think about it. There are many times that happened that it probably would not meet the company's definition. I don't need to wait on them. They don't have to validate me. The bullying and the harassment and the bias happened regardless of whether the company recognizes it or not. And I think that is a hugely important thing to remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but we are over time, I believe. So
Yeah, well, yeah, we have, yeah. Only a couple
I'm
minutes
happy to stay
before.
on and answer questions if necessary, but
Okay, yeah, Kellen's next, and she starts at 5 minutes from now, so this was a good topic. Got a lot of conversation going, so that was good. I like that.
well, thank you, everyone. Anybody wants to talk more? Anybody wants to hear more details about anything? On the befriendingdragons.com site, go to the contact page. Actually, I think all the pages now have a scheduled time with me. It brings up a Calendly link. Just choose the free 30-minute connection session. And I'm happy to have a conversation and talk through what's going on, what options I might want to recommend to you. I have a huge number of friends now that are coaches. I'm happy to, listen to you and say, well, given those circumstances, this coach might be right. And, just talk about whatever is useful to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks so much for coming today. It was a very powerful presentation. Well, discussion, I guess. Discussion.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.